Honestly, you're just a failure, Emily said, her words slicing through the quiet of our Saturday brunch like they were meant to wound. I froze mid-sip, the coffee steaming in my mug, not from the heat, but from the tension that settled over the kitchen table. The sunlight poured through the window blinds, casting stripes across the countertop, highlighting the mess of pancakes and toast that no longer seemed comforting. I glanced at her, green eyes sharp and focused, lips curling into that smug, practiced smile she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. I set the mug down gently, feeling the weight of her words, but keeping my posture relaxed, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, as if I were a man who had nothing to prove, when in truth every fiber of me burned to respond. Emily had always had a way of turning casual remarks into verdicts, and this morning was no exception. The kids were at their grandparents', the house silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional distant chirp of birds. It should have been ordinary, peaceful, like a typical weekend morning in the suburbs of Denver, but it wasn't. Because every time she said something like that, it reminded me that she had the power to reduce my years of steady work, patience, and quiet sacrifice to a punchline for her amusement. I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I just looked at her, letting the silence stretch, giving the weight of her own statement a chance to settle in. Emily leaned back, tapping her fingers against the ceramic mug she held, a faint smirk lingering. She thought this was control, that this was proof of her cleverness, her superiority. But she didn't know the half of it. I remembered the long hours at the office, the nights poring over spreadsheets and investments, the quiet patience that had allowed me to build a financial cushion that even she, with all her confidence, didn't suspect existed. I had accounts she'd never seen, advisors she'd never met, a foundation of security built silently while she assumed I was merely coasting through life. I rose from my chair, stretching slowly as if to shake off the morning tension, walking to the window and watching the trees sway gently in the breeze. The sun warmed the siding of the house, making the white trim gleam, but the warmth did little to soften the tension that clung to the room. I turned back to her, my expression calm, composed, voice steady as I said, "Emily, I think it's time we call the bank." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, curiosity flickering, but her smirk didn't fade. She thought I was joking. She didn't realize this simple statement carried with it months of preparation, quiet calculations, and the kind of authority that comes from knowing you hold the upper hand. I could see the shift in her demeanor, the first flicker of doubt crossing her features, though she tried to mask it with that practiced laugh of hers, soft and airy. "The bank?" she asked, tilting her head, still trying to maintain the air of superiority. I nodded, casually, as if the next words would be mundane, ordinary. "Yes, the bank. They'll want to speak with you directly." Her laugh faltered, almost imperceptibly, a crack in her armor that I had waited years to see. I didn't raise my voice, didn't hurry the moment, just let it unfold, letting the tension stretch and linger. Every second that passed was a beat of anticipation, a test of patience, a quiet assertion of control that she hadn't expected from me. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls drawing in as she processed, the calm morning air thick with unspoken understanding that something was about to shift, and the playful confidence she had wielded like a weapon for years was about to be met with the quiet, steady force of someone who had been underestimated. I leaned against the counter, sipping my coffee slowly, letting her observe, letting her think she still held the narrative. And somewhere deep down, I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both restraint and quiet satisfaction, knowing the moment of revelation was approaching, that the story wasn't over, and that the power she assumed she held was about to be revealed in a way that would leave her reassessing everything she thought she knew about me. Jack sat back down at the kitchen table, the sunlight shifting across the polished surface, reflecting off the crystal-clear glasses he had set out for their weekend brunch. He reached for the notepad he kept tucked near the coffee maker, the one Emily had never noticed, and began to review quietly the details of his accounts, investments, and financial plans. The numbers were neat, methodical, and entirely invisible to her assumptions about his income and work. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the maple trees lining the driveway, the familiar scent of fresh-cut grass wafting in, a reminder that life carried on regardless of tension inside these walls. Emily continued to move about the kitchen, gathering her fork and spoon, casually checking her phone, her tone light and airy as if nothing had just happened. And yet Jack could feel the subtle shift, the tiny adjustments in her posture that betrayed the first traces of concern. He observed silently, not out of cruelty, but with a keen awareness of timing, understanding that the impact of revelation could be maximized when the recipient was still confident, still unaware. He recalled the early mornings spent at the office, preparing meticulously for situations like this, months of planning and verifying details that would soon become the leverage he had quietly maintained. Every spreadsheet, every note, every contact with his banker had been carefully coordinated, ensuring that when the moment came, there would be no room for error. Jack took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the warmth, letting the aroma ground him in the routine he had cultivated over the years, a routine that Emily assumed was mundane, ordinary, unremarkable. Little did she know, that very mundanity masked the precision of a man who had quietly built a foundation strong enough to withstand any misjudgment. The air in the kitchen seemed to thicken, charged with the unspoken understanding that change was imminent, that the quiet patience and calculated restraint Jack had practiced were about to shift the balance in his favor. Emily glanced up, perhaps sensing the weight of his calm, the way it contrasted with her expectation of reaction, and for a brief moment her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Jack stood, walking over to the window and gazing out, the morning sun catching the gold in his hair, highlighting the steady composure he had maintained throughout years of subtle underestimation. He turned back to Emily, voice calm, even, precise, as he suggested contacting the bank, a statement that appeared casual but carried the full weight of his preparation. Her eyes widened slightly, the smirk fading into a thin line, and Jack allowed the silence to stretch, long enough for the full gravity of the moment to be felt without a word further spoken. He noticed her hands tighten slightly around the coffee mug, a subtle tremor betraying that the first cracks in her confidence had begun. Jack's expression remained neutral, controlled, but inside, a quiet satisfaction grew, the kind that comes from a man who has spent years perfecting patience, restraint, and the art of timing. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the leaves once more, a reminder of continuity, of life moving forward, and inside, the tension between perception and reality began its slow transformation. Jack moved to the counter, picked up his laptop, and opened the carefully organized folder that held all the documentation he would soon reference, the quiet assurance of preparation radiating through his posture and actions. Emily lingered near the table, curious yet cautious, not fully aware of the strategy unfolding in measured steps before her. Jack leaned back, fingers interlaced, taking a breath that was slow, deliberate, and steady, anchoring himself in the moment, allowing the calm to permeate the room, setting the stage for the inevitable shift from assumption to revelation. Every glance, every subtle gesture, every unspoken word in that space was calculated, creating a rhythm that would culminate in a moment of clarity and understanding for Emily, a revelation of hidden depth, competence, and control that had been there all along, quietly unseen. Jack's thoughts drifted briefly to the early days of their marriage, the long hours, the shared dreams, and the unnoticed efforts that had built a private, unassailable base of security, a foundation that Emily had never questioned until now. He returned to the table, picked up his mug, and took another measured sip, letting the warmth settle, the quiet strength of preparation and patience solidifying in his mind. He glanced at Emily once more, noting the shift in her demeanor, the subtle narrowing of her eyes, the way her confidence wavered under the weight of his composed presence. Jack's calmness, the steady rhythm of his movements, and the unspoken authority emanating from years of careful planning set the tone for the moment to come, a moment where assumptions would be challenged and respect quietly reclaimed without the need for confrontation, a testament to the power of silent control and deliberate action. Jack picked up his phone and scrolled through the contacts, deliberately slow, his thumb hovering over the name of the banker he had scheduled for this precise moment. The sun had climbed higher, bathing the kitchen in a warm light that reflected off the stainless steel appliances, and the faint aroma of toasted bread lingered in the air. Emily leaned against the counter, pretending to sip her coffee casually. But Jack could sense the subtle tension in her posture, the way her fingers tapped lightly against the mug, betraying her anticipation. He pressed the call button and set the phone on speaker, letting the soft ringtone fill the room, a quiet reminder that action was underway. Emily's eyes flicked to the phone, curiosity mixing with a trace of apprehension she did not yet recognize. Jack maintained a calm, measured tone as he answered when the banker picked up, greeting the voice on the line with familiarity and authority, the kind that comes from years of consistent engagement and professionalism. He introduced Emily formally, stating her full name and account details in a way that conveyed respect and acknowledgement, yet subtly highlighted her lack of prior knowledge about the matters at hand. Emily's smirk faded gradually, replaced by a hesitant, cautious smile as she realized the gravity of the interaction she had assumed would be mundane. Jack continued, providing precise instructions, and the banker responded with professional courtesy, addressing Emily as ma'am, a small but deliberate acknowledgement of her new position in this controlled dynamic. Jack observed her reaction carefully, noting the subtle shift in her body language, the slight tension in her shoulders, and the quick intake of breath that signaled the first moment of surprise and recognition of her miscalculation. He did not rush, did not interrupt, allowing the conversation to unfold naturally, as if orchestrated by patience and quiet mastery. Outside the window, a breeze stirred the branches of the maple tree, casting flickering shadows across the kitchen floor, and Jack felt a sense of satisfaction in the rhythm of the moment, the slow build-up to revelation that had been planned and executed with precision. Emily's eyes darted between him and the phone, the previous confidence she had wielded now replaced by a tentative awareness, the realization that Jack had quietly controlled far more of the situation than she had ever assumed. Jack leaned back, sipping his coffee with deliberate slowness, letting the warmth of the liquid and the calm of his posture reinforce the authority he silently projected. He reflected on the years of careful management, the quiet diligence that had allowed him to remain underestimated while building substantial security and influence behind the scenes, the type of invisible power that only patience, consistency, and foresight can create. Emily's lips parted slightly, a subtle gasp that was almost imperceptible, and Jack caught it, noting the precise moment where understanding began to dawn, where the dynamic of their interaction shifted from the familiar to a newly defined balance. He allowed a brief pause, letting the silence carry weight, accentuating the subtle triumph of preparation and foresight over her previous assumptions. Jack's gaze remained steady, calm, and controlled, his posture relaxed yet authoritative, communicating without words the culmination of strategy, insight, and quiet confidence. Emily's hand hovered over the counter, her fingers curling around the edge as she processed the situation, and Jack remained composed, allowing the banker to continue with precise, respectful responses, each one reinforcing the careful structure he had established. The room, filled with sunlight and the faint hum of the refrigerator, held a quiet tension, the kind that signals a pivotal shift without dramatic gestures or raised voices. Jack felt the measured satisfaction of the first stage of the plan succeeding, the initial revelation achieved without confrontation, and he knew that the moment of full understanding, when Emily would fully recognize the depth of his preparation and composure, was approaching. He took another slow sip of coffee, letting the flavor anchor him in the calm certainty of the moment, while Emily's expression transformed from confidence to cautious recognition, her initial dismissiveness giving way to tentative awareness, the subtle but undeniable shift in authority now clearly defined. Jack's patience, control, and meticulous preparation had created the environment for this moment, and he felt a quiet triumph in the seamless unfolding, the first taste of acknowledgement, the carefully constructed crescendo of influence and revelation. Jack leaned back in his chair, the morning sunlight now casting a warm glow across the hardwood floors, reflecting off the polished silverware and neatly arranged coffee cups on the table. He allowed himself a brief moment to breathe, savoring the calm that came after the carefully orchestrated phone call. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the kitchen, and the soft creak of the floorboards beneath Emily's feet as she moved toward the living room carried with it a subtle tension he could feel even without looking. He observed her from the corner of his eye, noting the way her usual confident stride had softened, replaced by a measured, tentative pace, as if she were testing the ground beneath her. Jack's hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, fingers interlaced, posture relaxed yet deliberate, a silent reminder that he was fully aware, fully in control, while allowing her to grapple with her shifting perception. He thought about the years spent building his quiet foundation, the long nights reviewing statements, setting up accounts, and maintaining investments that had remained invisible to her, a fortress of preparation, constructed in the background of a seemingly ordinary life. The contrast between what she assumed and the reality now unfolding created a subtle rhythm in the room, a pulse of anticipation that Jack managed with precision. Emily glanced toward the window, catching a glimpse of the neighborhood bathed in morning light, a normal suburban scene that belied the tension within their home, and Jack could see the flicker of realization cross her features, a small crack in the armor of confidence she had wielded so freely. He took a deliberate sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle in, grounding him as he allowed the weight of silence to stretch, each passing second amplifying the subtle shift in power. The faint click of the bank line still resonated in the background, and Jack noted the way her eyes momentarily widened, tracing the source of the sound, registering the invisible mechanisms he had quietly set in motion. He remained composed, voice low and steady as he began casually discussing the weekend plans, a subtle distraction designed to maintain normalcy while the undercurrent of revelation settled in. Emily listened, nodding and responding in kind, yet there was a noticeable hesitation in her tone, a careful modulation as she processed the emerging awareness that Jack had orchestrated, a quiet demonstration of authority she had not anticipated. Jack allowed himself a faint, measured smile, a small acknowledgement of the meticulous patience and strategy that had led to this point. He reflected on the subtle art of timing, the way each gesture, each pause, each choice of words contributed to the unfolding narrative, a story of understated mastery built over years. The scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of toast, grounding the scene in domestic normality even as the undercurrent of tension wove its intricate thread through the room. Jack's eyes traced the pattern of light across the floor, noting the shadows shifting with the passage of time, a visual reminder that moments like these are transient, fleeting, yet capable of profound impact when guided with intention. Emily's fingers tapped lightly against the counter, a subconscious signal of her rising awareness, and Jack observed without interruption, allowing the interaction to unfold naturally, the subtle dance of realization and acknowledgement playing out in real time. He sipped his coffee again, letting the warmth anchor his thoughts, while Emily paused mid-step, considering her next words, her usual cadence tempered by the quiet authority emanating from Jack. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, the occasional rustle of leaves punctuating the calm, and inside, the kitchen became a stage for the delicate unfolding of power, patience, and revelation. Jack's calm demeanor, combined with his measured movements and composed voice, created a rhythm that guided Emily's perception, leading her from confident dismissal to cautious recognition, a transformation that would quietly redefine their dynamic without a single raised voice or dramatic gesture. Each moment, each detail, each carefully controlled interaction contributed to the gradual, inevitable acknowledgement of Jack's preparation and restraint, a silent demonstration of mastery that left Emily adjusting her expectations, recalibrating her understanding, and experiencing for the first time the full weight of his quiet authority. Jack moved toward the dining room, each step deliberate, measured, the hardwood floor cool beneath his socks. He glanced at the clock on the wall, the hands moving steadily toward midday, marking the passage of a morning that had already shifted the balance in subtle yet undeniable ways. Emily followed at a distance, her posture more tentative now, the confidence she had carried with ease earlier tempered by an emerging awareness of his composure and control. Jack reached the table where the brunch plates had been cleared moments ago and picked up a folder containing the documentation he had prepared, the precise details of his accounts, investments, and plans, all arranged meticulously, each page a testament to quiet diligence and foresight. He opened it casually, letting the sight of organized, professional materials subtly reinforce the seriousness of the moment without a word spoken. Emily leaned against the wall, fingers tracing the edge of the countertop, glancing occasionally at the folder with a mixture of curiosity and cautious apprehension, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Jack settled into a chair, maintaining relaxed composure, and began flipping through the folder slowly, deliberately, giving her the time to notice the depth of preparation he had undertaken, each page a quiet assertion of his competence and foresight. The sun poured in through the large windows, highlighting the gleam of the pages, reflecting off the silverware still neatly arranged nearby, creating a calm, controlled environment that contrasted with the internal shift occurring in Emily's perception. He looked up briefly, meeting her gaze, expression steady and calm, allowing the silence to stretch and emphasizing the unspoken message that he had always been prepared, always capable, even when she had underestimated him. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, the subtle tightening of her jaw betraying the acknowledgement of her miscalculation, a shift in the dynamics of their interaction that Jack observed with measured satisfaction. He returned to the folder, tapping lightly on a page to draw attention to a particular set of details, the movement casual yet intentional, a nonverbal signal reinforcing his quiet authority. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees, the leaves casting flickering shadows across the room, a visual echo of the subtle changes taking place within the household. Jack allowed himself a faint, controlled smile, one that conveyed both calmness and quiet satisfaction, a reflection of his years of preparation, patience, and quiet mastery, the kind of authority that did not need to be loudly proclaimed to be undeniable. Emily shifted slightly, stepping closer but keeping her distance, a tentative curiosity mixing with the dawning realization that the man she had underestimated all these years possessed a calm, unspoken power that was now manifesting in the quiet, deliberate unfolding of the morning. Jack closed the folder slowly, hands resting lightly atop it, and leaned back, letting the gentle weight of the papers symbolize the foundation of stability, competence, and foresight he had built silently over the years. The room remained quiet except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional bird chirping outside, yet the atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the subtle rhythm of control, patience, and preparation defining the space. Emily's eyes followed his movements, reflecting the growing recognition of the balance of power, her posture softening, awareness deepening, understanding that the carefully constructed, understated strength Jack embodied had always been present, quietly shaping the outcomes she had once assumed were controlled by her alone. Jack remained composed, deliberate, and calm, letting the moment fully develop, each second amplifying the realization for Emily, allowing the quiet authority he had cultivated to resonate, and the subtle shift in dynamics to settle naturally into the room. He sipped his coffee once more, feeling the warmth anchor him, while observing the subtle, cautious adjustments in Emily's expression, noting the small, almost imperceptible changes in tone, gaze, and posture that marked her acknowledgement of his preparation, patience, and quiet mastery, a powerful but understated revelation that was now fully in motion. Jack set the folder aside and allowed his gaze to sweep the room, taking in the subtle details of their home that had always been background to the daily rhythm of life. The walls, painted a soft cream, reflected the morning light, the artwork neatly framed and hung straight, each piece telling a story of careful thought and order. The scent of coffee mingled with the faint aroma of baked bread that lingered from breakfast, creating a domestic normality that contrasted sharply with the undercurrent of tension and revelation he had initiated. Emily shifted slightly, adjusting the scarf around her neck, an unconscious gesture that spoke to the delicate recalibration of her confidence and composure. Jack moved toward the sideboard where he kept a small tray of correspondence, opening the neatly stacked envelopes and letters, handling each with care and precision, a quiet display of organization and attentiveness that underscored the meticulous approach he brought to every aspect of his life. He selected a single document, held it casually in one hand, and placed it on the dining table where Emily could see it, the gesture calm yet deliberate, signaling the next stage of the unfolding awareness he had orchestrated. Emily's eyes flicked toward the paper, curiosity and apprehension mingling, and Jack allowed the moment to stretch, the silence carrying weight, each second amplifying the tension without a word being spoken. He returned to his chair, settling comfortably, posture relaxed but purposeful, exuding a quiet authority that required no proclamation, only the presence of careful control. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves of the maple trees, casting moving shadows across the floors and walls, a subtle reminder that the world continued beyond the walls of their home even as dynamics within it quietly shifted. Jack picked up his coffee cup again, taking a measured sip, savoring the warmth, allowing the familiar taste to ground him while he observed Emily's responses, small movements and expressions that signaled her growing recognition of the depth of preparation, patience, and quiet power he had cultivated over the years. She stepped closer, the soft creak of the hardwood underfoot marking her approach, and Jack tilted his head slightly, giving her space while maintaining control of the moment, the unfolding scene a demonstration of composure and strategy in motion. He glanced at the folder once more, its contents neatly arranged, each page a testament to foresight and silent diligence, and he considered how these years of unseen preparation had brought them to this precise point, the culmination of patience, awareness, and measured action. Emily's lips parted slightly as she considered the document, her previous certainty tempered by the dawning understanding that the man she had underestimated possessed a quiet mastery she had not accounted for, a capability that had remained hidden until now. Jack allowed the silence to persist, a deliberate choice to let the tension mature, to let her process the implications without interruption, creating an environment where the revelation would have maximum impact through subtlety rather than confrontation. The kitchen, bright with morning light, became a stage for the careful interplay of awareness, perception, and authority, and Jack's steady presence anchored the space, his every movement controlled and deliberate, each gesture contributing to the unfolding understanding. Emily shifted again, the scarf tightening unconsciously around her neck, a subtle indicator of the shifting perception, and Jack observed without comment, maintaining the measured pace, the calmness that emphasized the depth of his preparation and the quiet assertion of competence that had always been present. He took another slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle and focusing on the rhythm of the morning, the faint sounds of birds outside, and the quiet hum of appliances inside framing the unfolding dynamic. Jack allowed his eyes to meet Emily's briefly, conveying calm, control, and unspoken satisfaction, reinforcing the subtle but undeniable shift in awareness. And then he returned his attention to the folder, handling it with deliberate care, signaling the readiness to continue guiding the revelation at his own pace. Every movement, glance, and pause was deliberate, a choreographed exercise in restraint and control, each element reinforcing the steady, deliberate unfolding of recognition and recalibration that defined this morning, the quiet triumph of patience and planning manifest in the simple, controlled interactions that now governed the room. Jack did not touch the document for nearly a full minute. He let it sit there on the dining table like an unopened door, plain white paper against dark walnut, harmless to anyone who did not understand what it represented. Emily stood across from him, no longer pretending not to look. Her eyes kept returning to the letterhead at the top, then to his face, then back again, as if she were trying to solve a math problem she had already answered wrong in front of the class. I could see her searching for the version of me she understood, the quiet husband in worn jeans who checked tire pressure in the driveway and clipped grocery coupons out of habit, the man who drove a 12-year-old pickup. Even though he could have afforded something newer, the man she had turned into a household joke because modesty looked like weakness from where she stood. That was the mistake people make when they confuse simple with small. They see a man who does not brag and assume there is nothing to brag about. They see a man who does not flash money and assume he does not have any. They see patience and call it fear. I watched Emily study that paper, and for a moment, I thought about all the little cuts that had led us here. The dinner at her sister's house, when she said I dressed like a guy who still shopped from a clearance rack. The Christmas party where she laughed when one of her friends asked whether I had ever been inside a private banking office. The afternoon at the mall when she waved off the watch I liked and said, loud enough for the saleswoman to hear, that I should stay in my lane. None of those moments had ended our marriage by themselves. That is not how respect disappears. It does not vanish in one explosion. It drains away, teaspoon by teaspoon, until one day you realize the cup has been empty for years. I reached for the document at last, turned it slightly toward her, and rested 2 fingers on the page. My voice stayed even. "This is the appointment confirmation for tomorrow morning," I said. 10 o'clock downtown. Private client services. Emily blinked. The words landed slowly, like pebbles dropped into deep water. "Private client services for what?" she asked, and there it was, that old tone trying to come back, sharp at the edges, searching for control. But the edge had dulled. I could hear it. She could, too. I tapped the page once, not hard, just enough to draw her eyes down. For the transfer review, the trust documents, and the property loan payoff. Her mouth opened, then closed. A few seconds earlier, she had still been standing in our dining room as the woman who thought she knew every limit of my life. Now she was standing in a room that seemed to have grown unfamiliar around her. The chairs, the windows, the family pictures on the wall, even the quiet clock above the sideboard, all of it looked the same, but the story underneath it had changed. "Property loan," she repeated. I nodded. "The cabin outside Breckenridge." Her forehead tightened. "That cabin is rented." "It was," I said. "Until I bought it 3 years ago." The room went still. Not dramatic still. Not movie still. Real still. The kind of still where you hear the air conditioner click on and realize your whole life has been making background noise while the truth waited its turn. Emily looked toward the hallway, then back at me, like the house itself might offer her a different answer. I did not enjoy the look on her face as much as I thought I would. That surprised me. For years, I had imagined some grand satisfaction in the moment she finally understood that she had been wrong about me. But sitting there, watching confusion replace arrogance, I felt something heavier than satisfaction. I felt tired. Not weak tired. Finished tired. The kind that comes after carrying a conversation alone for too long. "You bought a cabin," she said quietly. "With what money?" I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because that question told the whole story. Not how. Not why. Not when did you do this. With what money? Even now, her first instinct was disbelief, because the man in front of her did not match the poverty she had assigned to him in her mind. I folded my hands together on the table. "With money I earned. Money I saved. Money I invested before you decided my paycheck was the entire size of my worth." Her face tightened, but she did not interrupt. That was new. Emily had always treated silence like a space she was entitled to fill, but now she let it stand. I leaned back and looked past her toward the window. Across the street, Mr. Lawson was watering his lawn in cargo shorts and white sneakers, just like every Saturday. A delivery truck rolled slowly past the curb. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and stopped. It was strange how ordinary the world remained while a marriage quietly changed shape. I turned back to her. "The banker called you, ma'am, because tomorrow you are going to sit in that office and hear everything directly. Not from me. Not in an argument. Not through some version you can twist later. You are going to hear the balances, the ownership records, the trust structure, and the reason I kept it separate." Emily's eyes sharpened at that last part. "Separate?" she asked. I nodded once. "Separate because respect matters. Because for years, every time you called me broke, every time you used money as a way to measure my value, you proved you were not ready to know what I had built." Her face changed then. The anger tried to rise, but behind it was something else, something smaller and more honest. Fear, maybe, or recognition. She looked down at the document again, and for the first time that morning, she did not look like a woman preparing a comeback. She looked like a woman reading the first page of a story she had assumed she already owned, only to discover she had never been the author. Emily stood very still, but the room around her seemed to keep moving. The sunlight kept sliding across the table. The clock kept ticking above the sideboard. The air conditioner kept whispering through the vents like nothing important had happened at all. I watched her stare at that appointment confirmation, and for a few seconds I saw the woman I married before disappointment learned how to wear her face. Not the polished version who corrected my jacket in public or smiled too brightly when her friends made jokes about my truck. I saw the younger Emily from a tiny apartment off South Broadway, sitting cross-legged on the floor with takeout boxes between us, laughing because our first couch had springs that squeaked every time we sat down. Back then, she called thrift store curtains charming. Back then, she said a quiet life sounded peaceful. Back then, if I came home tired, she noticed the weight in my shoulders before I said a word. That memory landed harder than I expected. It did not excuse what she had become, but it reminded me that people do not always turn cold all at once. Sometimes they drift there, one dinner, one comparison, one careless sentence at a time, until the person beside you becomes a stranger who still knows where you keep the coffee filters. Emily finally looked up. "Why did you hide it from me?" Her voice was softer now, but not humble enough to be clean. There was still accusation in it, still the old habit of making my boundaries sound like betrayal. I leaned back, feeling the chair press against my spine, and took a slow breath. Because every time I tried to talk about building something long-term, you heard limitation instead of discipline. You heard patience and called it lack of ambition. You heard caution and called it being cheap. Her eyes flickered, and I knew she remembered. The vacation she wanted in Miami when I said we should wait until the emergency fund was stronger. The new luxury sport utility vehicle she wanted after her promotion, even though her old car had only 48,000 miles on it. The dinner where she laughed and told her coworker that I treated money like it was going to run away in the night. I had smiled that night, too. Men learn how to smile when they are being reduced in public because anger makes everyone comfortable blaming them. Calmness is harder. Calmness makes people hear what they said. I was not hiding a secret life, I said. I was protecting a future. Emily crossed her arms, but the gesture did not have the same authority anymore. It looked like shelter. Our future, she said. I nodded slowly. That was the idea. The words sat between us, simple and heavy. Her face tightened, and she looked away toward the living room, where our wedding photo still hung above the mantel. In that picture, I was smiling like a man who believed effort could solve anything. Emily was holding my hand with both of hers, her white dress gathered at her feet, her eyes full of something I used to call certainty. I wondered when certainty had become entitlement. I wondered when partnership had become performance. I wondered how long I had been repairing a bridge she had already stopped crossing. The phone buzzed on the table, and both of us looked down. A text from Daniel Pierce, my banker, lit the screen. Confirmation for tomorrow. We will have the private client room ready. Bring identification for both parties. I did not pick it up right away. I let Emily read the first line from where she stood. Her lips parted slightly, and the last trace of denial in her expression thinned. There is a particular sound people make when their assumptions collapse. It is not loud. It is not theatrical. Sometimes it is just one quiet breath pulled in through the nose, a small surrender the body makes before pride can stop it. Emily made that sound. Then she sat down across from me, not gracefully, not dramatically, just slowly, like her knees had finally admitted what her mouth would not. How much are we talking about? She asked. There it was again. The question dressed differently, but wearing the same shoes. I looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, but with a kind of tired clarity. Enough, I said. Enough to pay off this house. Enough to buy the cabin outright. Enough to help my mother retire comfortably. Enough that the word poor should never have been in your mouth unless you were talking about character. Emily flinched. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Some sentences do not need volume when the truth inside them is already sharp enough. She looked down at her hands, at the wedding ring catching a thin stripe of sunlight, and for the first time all morning, she seemed smaller than the room. Not powerless, not broken, just confronted by the mirror she had avoided for too long. I folded the appointment paper and placed it back in the folder. Tomorrow is not about humiliating you, I said. It is about clarity. You wanted to measure me by money. Fine. Tomorrow you will see the numbers. But today, you need to understand something more important. The money was never the point. The way you treated me when you thought I had none was the point. Outside, the delivery truck had moved on. Mr. Lawson had turned off his sprinkler. The neighborhood returned to its quiet Saturday rhythm, lawns shining, flags lifting gently from porch posts, the Rockies standing blue and distant beyond the edge of town. Emily sat across from me, silent now, not because she had nothing to say, but because every answer she could reach for had already been used up. I stood, carried my mug to the sink, and rinsed it carefully. The water ran clear over the ceramic, warm against my hand, ordinary as ever. When I turned back, She was still staring at the folder, and I knew the real meeting had not even started yet. The morning moved forward with quiet determination, the sunlight climbing higher and warming the kitchen as Jack and Emily remained seated across from one another. Jack opened the folder slowly, sliding a single page toward her, letting the weight of anticipation fill the space between them. She reached for it cautiously, her fingers brushing the edge, almost hesitating as though touching it might shift reality itself. Jack's expression remained calm, steady, and unassuming, yet there was a subtle intensity beneath the surface, a quiet authority that he had cultivated over years of preparation. He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped loosely in front of him, and watched Emily scan the page, her eyes narrowing, tracing lines of numbers and entries that had always existed but were invisible to her understanding. The sunlight reflected off the polished surface of the table, glinting in the corner of her eye as she absorbed the information slowly, methodically, realizing that everything she had dismissed or underestimated had been deliberate, calculated, and substantial. Outside, the wind moved the branches of the maple tree, rustling leaves and scattering shadows across the floor, as if nature itself punctuated the weight of comprehension settling into the room. Jack remained silent, letting the document do the talking, allowing Emily to confront the discrepancy between perception and reality without interference. Her lips parted slightly, an involuntary breath that betrayed astonishment and a sudden awareness of her own misjudgment. He noted the subtle tightening of her shoulders, the slight tilt of her head, the unspoken admission of surprise, and the dawning recognition that the man she had believed to be ordinary was anything but. Jack took a measured sip of his coffee, the warmth anchoring him, steadying the rhythm of his presence, while Emily's gaze flicked from the page to his calm face, trying to reconcile the quiet composure with the evidence before her. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft squeak of the hardwood, and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog punctuated the silence, each sound emphasizing the contrast between normalcy and revelation. Jack set the mug down gently, leaning forward just slightly, allowing the weight of the folder to rest lightly on the table between them, a tangible bridge spanning the gap between understanding and misconception. Emily's eyes moved across the columns, catching on the account numbers, the dates, the balances, the trust arrangements, and the subtle annotations Jack had placed with methodical care. She exhaled slowly, the sound soft but carrying the weight of realization, a sound that confirmed she understood the depth of his foresight and the quiet strength he had always possessed. Jack's posture remained relaxed, unassuming, yet each movement was deliberate, each gesture reinforcing the control he held over the narrative without needing to speak more than necessary. The room felt charged with the tension of recognition, a slow burn that was not dramatic but intensely intimate in its clarity. Emily finally lifted her gaze, meeting his steady eyes, and for the first time that morning, her face carried no smirk, no challenge, only measured reflection, as though she were seeing him, and herself, for the first time in years. Jack allowed a quiet smile, restrained and subtle, to pass across his face, a small acknowledgement of the shift, of the moment of clarity that he had orchestrated with patience and precision. Outside, the street remained calm, the neighbors tending to their lawns, the delivery trucks rolling by, oblivious to the quiet recalibration occurring within the walls of a suburban home. Jack leaned back, letting the chair support him fully, and folded his hands lightly, maintaining the balance between presence and restraint, control and observation, allowing the moment to breathe, giving Emily space to absorb, to comprehend, to acknowledge without a single word of confrontation. She shifted slightly, tracing a line with her finger along the document, and Jack noted the movement with mild amusement and quiet satisfaction, the realization that patience and meticulous planning had yielded a result far more powerful than any immediate reaction or argument. He remained composed, his calm, steady gaze, affirming the authority he had held silently for years, while Emily sat across from him, quiet now, still reading, still absorbing, still adjusting her understanding of the man she thought she knew and the life he had quietly built beyond her notice. The room held the warmth of morning, the quiet rhythm of domestic routine, and yet beneath it, the dynamic had changed irrevocably, the balance recalibrated, and the understanding that would shape the next chapter firmly established.